the Sprouts Environment Trust lecture series. It's my privilege to invite Dr. Soumita Mukherjee, a very, very dear friend of mine and an eminent scientist in the wildlife fraternity. So we will start with the introduction. I'd invite Amruta Padgaonkar, the co-educator of Sprouts, to please introduce Dr. Soumita Mukherjee, and then after that, I'll give you a little bit brief about the lecture series of Sprouts. Yeah, Amruta.
So our today's speaker, Dr. Soumita Mukherjee, did her bachelor's from Xavier's College, Mumbai, and then her master's in wildlife biology and doctoral degrees from the Wildlife Institute of India, Dehradun. Currently, she is the senior principal scientist at SACON, and her work focuses on preparing a conservation action plan for the forest owlet. Her other work revolves around small cats such as jungle cat, leopard cat, fishing cat, and rusty spotted cat, where it deals with exploring their evolutionary, genetic, and ecological aspects. Also, their geographical distribution, diet, coexistence. She has also conducted surveys on takins in Arunachal uh, Pradesh. She has over 40 plus peer-reviewed publications, book chapters, special issues, and technical reports. She has taught evolutionary ecology in and conservation genetics in SECON and has led many workshops at student conferences in India. She is she is also a supervisor for a master's and doctoral student. She has been a member of the IUCN's cat specialist group since 1995. So I welcome Soumita Mukherjee.
I'll give you a little brief about the lecture series that Sprouts has been organizing for the last 8 years. This is our 9th year ongoing, and we have earlier conducted various lectures related to ecology, conservation, and awareness, wildlife research, and various evolutionary biology related topics. In the recent past, we have also had literary writers, and we've looked at conservation or environment and wildlife through coins, through mythology, and soon we might even have things like art and other formats that we might look at it in. This today is going to be a slightly more technical kind of talk because Dr. Mukherjee has immense amount of work across the Indian subcontinent, and she's probably for the foremost small cat experts within the country. Uh, that and she's been a member of the IUCN since 1995. So I would think one of the longest standing members of the IUCN cat specialist group. Uh, but you will see from her work, if you visit her website, the SACON website, and see her profile, you'll see that she's worked on birds. She's also has interest in insects and all sorts forms of canid as well as felid, interrelationship and habitat interactions that are important for conservation, as well as looking at abundances and distributions of food bases such as rodents, as well as in the grassland ecology. So if we are all ready to take a very, very deep dive into pellet conservation and the mysteries of these small cats, I once again welcome Dr. Soumita Mukherjee, and we'll start on from here. So just one question before we go ahead. Usually we take the questions at the end. Would you want it that way, or would it be okay if I ask? Would you want it to be like first speak and then handle all the questions? Because sometimes the questions get answered in future slides. So as however your comfort is.
Yeah, so whatever, if it gets, I don't mind in between as long as it doesn't take very long, it
Yes.
shouldn't go beyond like 2 hours or something, because I'll get really tired. I have a lot of other stuff to finish,
Sure. So we'll try and keep it. So I think it's better that like always, we'll first have your presentation and then we'll do a Q&A of about 30 minutes or so.
Okay. But if there's something that's really a burning question, please ask. I don't mind.
Sure. Okay, great. Right. So let me share the screen and start the presentation. Before we go ahead, I'd also like to thank Youthful India, uh, Mahesh Samant and Dviti Das, as who always support us and host us on this platform on their sign up. It's almost a year. We are on our 11th session online. Till before that, we've had all our sessions physically. So this will be our 11th session, and next session will be on our full 1 year anniversary of going online, which has allowed us to get a lot of international or speakers from faraway distances. So over to you, Shomita.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Thanks, Anand, and thanks, Amrita and Dviti. So I will talk about my experiences studying this family, and also, so while I speak, I'll also talk a bit about the places that I visited, and some kind of fun that we've had, because it's all part of field studies, and you guys must be knowing already that it's a great amount of fun doing the kind of science we do, where we interact with nature so closely. So yeah, you can go to the next one. So I will talk about what makes cats very unique, So there are now around 41 species that have been identified, or maybe I shall say they have been split into around 41 species. And all of them, what is absolutely unique about cats is every member of the cat family is an obligate carnivore, which means that they cannot survive without eating meat. Even your domestic cat, you should not be giving it a largely carbohydrate diet, because they cannot digest carbohydrates well at all. So they get all their energy purely from fat and protein, and they make their own glucose in a process called glucose neogenesis. Okay, so they're very unique in that. They get a lot of their nutrients, the stuff that we can make ourselves, our bodies can make, they cannot make, and they get it only from meat, like even things like vitamin B12 and several amino acids, which are absolutely crucial and for their functioning, and they get it purely from meat. And if you don't give them meat, or they cannot have meat, especially young kittens can die very fast if they don't get good quality meat. So, or good quality protein, I should say, which is largely meat. And so if you look at it, their entire morphology or their body is built specifically to, gather this kind of resource that is meat, so they are actually superb hunters, as we all know, and every part of their body is actually made just for that. So if you look at their eyes, you see there are differences. Even though they all are specialized, you'll see that the larger cats have, round eyes, round irises, and the smaller ones, especially the ones that are closely related to the house cat, have elliptical irises. And this says a lot. The eyes, or the size of the eyes and the structure of the iris, actually informs a lot on the kind of what you say, the temporal space that they use. For instance, the ones that are really nocturnal, not all cats are nocturnal, and not all are purely nocturnal. Yeah, so you will see often the larger cats also hunt by the day, and the smaller ones actually largely hunt by the night. And if you see the proportion of the size of their eyes to the rest of their face, they'll have enormous eyes. If we had eyes of the same size, they would be the size of tennis balls. So you can imagine how large their eyes are in proportion to their faces. And this suggests that they're very nocturnal. And the elliptical irises of the house cat and its relatives is actually largely it is very, very efficient in pulling in or keeping out light, so they can function during the day also, as well as they can in the night. So, it has a kind of a cross mechanism. So even in your camera lens, it is a circular mechanism for opening and closing, like the large cats and like our eyes, whereas these smaller cats have a crisscross mechanism like this. So it closes much more efficiently, So it opens out just as much, but it closes more efficiently. So it's more to keep out light during the day. And then if you look at their noses are also exceptionally powerful. Perhaps not as much as the canids, because the canids have a longer face, and so they have a larger surface area in their turbinals. But in cats, the turbinals are very highly packed together and very highly, what you say, corrugated, you may say, and that also increases the surface area manifold. And again, if you look at the nose pads of cats, they differ substantially between different species. And then coming to their skulls, which is, according to me, the most beautiful part of their anatomy. The skulls are so beautifully sculpted. It almost looks like Leonardo da Vinci, or some, very, very skillful sculptor has sculpted their skulls, because they're just perfect. Especially if you look at the articulation of the upper jaw to the lower jaw, that is a skull to the lower jaw. So we all have a process called the transverse process, So there is a hinge, and the process goes over here. You can feel it if you press your hand against the place where your lower jaw touches the skull. And if you are talking or you're eating, you can feel the movement. And primate skulls and even many herbivore skulls, actually the articulation looks very crude in a way, it's just a knob which moves around. In cats, it's absolutely beautiful. It's a hinge, okay, and a process that goes into it exactly like this. They fit in so beautifully that, it really looks like a sculptor has sat and fitted it, or a carpenter has sat and fitted it, And because of this kind of a articulation, they are not able to move their jaws sideways like we can. They can only move their jaws up and down. But there's a purpose for that also. Their teeth are very, very special. So cats have a very reduced dentition. They, we have 32 teeth, finally, but they have a final set of 28 teeth. So they do not have the last molars, and a lot of their teeth have become redundant, or rather they have become so reduced that they are not used at all, and they've almost gone. So what their teeth are, the dentition of a cat are daggers, which are the canines, and scissors, which are the premolars and molars, the first molar, which are known as carnassials. So in the upper jaw is the premolars that form the scissor-like carnassials, and in the lower jaw is the molar and premolar that form the carnassial. And they fit in exactly like a scissor. So what they can do is stab and kill with their dagger, and tear and swallow with the scissors. So that's what their teeth are like. And then if you look at the paw, I don't know if you can tell the difference between these two images. Okay, but one is of a house cat and one is of a tiger. I've only, I have just killed the scale and the proportion, and I have made them the same size. And you can see that there's really no difference. They are the same. And so this is the front paw in both of them, because the inner lobe has been pushed up and in, whereas the hind paw, you will have 3 clear visible lobes at the same plane, at the same whatever. So now next one. So I'll have scattered several of my slides with a kind of a what would you call a saying on cats, of so do read them also. They're just fun. So this is a phylogeny, or the family tree of a cat. Okay, or the cat family. So it's just that it's placed sideways. Normally, when you look at family trees, they are placed like grandfather on top and everything coming down like this. In this, it is just placed sideways. That's how it's depicted usually in in scientific publications. So There are a lot of information in this. Okay, so this is a phylogeny that is made with molecular data or genetic data, and it is perhaps the most comprehensive phylogeny that was made in 2006. Okay, and if you look at the ones in blue, all the cats in blue are the ones that are found in India, and the ones in purple are the ones that are found in South America, all of South America. Now, I have only put South America and India because these are the places that are the richest in cats. Okay, and India actually is a country that is richest in cats anywhere in the world, you know, and I guess I will talk about that a little later. And unless I've already in the previous slide, I don't know if I have said 15 species of cats are found in India. But anyway, here are the 15. Now, I will ask you a question, okay? And whoever can, please answer, because it'll be interesting if it's a little more interactive. So what can you see in this pattern? What does it tell you?
You can type out the answers in the chat box.
Or you can just whatever, you know,
Unmute them.
please you unmute yourself and say something.
So whoever has an answer can raise their hand and we can unmute them specifically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Anushka has replied phylogeny.
Yeah, but this is a phylogeny, which I've already mentioned at the title.
Yeah.
So that's, you know, it's.
Can you be a little more elaborate than that? Yeah. What patterns can you see is the question.
What can you, yeah, what is it? What does it tell you? So I'll give you just half a minute more and then I will proceed.
Pranav is replying saying that the size, what
Size
about the
of what?
size what? Yeah. Oops, sorry.
Okay, so let me tell you one thing. If you look at the cat tree, you see the blue ones are scattered all across the tree, right? The ones in India are scattered across the tree, which means there are many, many different subfamilies or whatever you call it, you know. It's not subfamilies, many different genera that are found in India. Okay, so many, many different cousins, you can say, are found in India, right? And when you look at the South American one, they're mostly clumped into one place. Yeah. So what does that tell you? There are two different processes that are acting over here that create diversity in a particular area. The one in South America is speciation. Okay, because they've all speciated in that same place, they are still very closely related to each other. Okay, and so they are all clumped together in the ocelot lineage. Whereas in India, the process that has generated so much of diversity is colonization. So cats have come from different places into India. And that's why they have, because they've come from different places, they are not necessarily so closely related to each other within a cat tree. They're all cats. They're all overall very closely related. But within the cat tree, it's like cousins. You know, they've come from different places, different forefathers. Yeah. So this is a very, very strong message from this phylogeny, that India has been colonized by cats and South America has given rise to cats, a very different group of cats, which are not found anywhere else but in South America. Okay. Next one.
And can you just elaborate which would be the most ancient cat in this phylogeny then? For
okay, the one that is found, so the Panthera lineage, okay, is like the oldest lineage. You can see here it is about 10.8 million years ago that this particular ancestor of the Panthera came in, the Panthera lineage. Okay, and then if you look at the house cat lineage, it is the youngest lineage. Yeah, it is more towards the right, and this one is more this side, right? So next one. Yeah, so this is what I was talking about. India is very, very lucky because of the kind of habitats that India has to offer. to the cats, and cats have come from many different places. And we have 15 species of cats in India. No other country has these many cats. And so this region is very, very rich for cats. Okay. And we have the largest cat, which is the tiger. And we also have the smallest cat, which is the rusty spotted cat. The only other place so far to have something similar is Nepal. Okay, so Nepal has both these cats also, but you see geographically it is stuck to India. So that region is, it's like, really exceedingly rich for cats and for other biodiversity as well. Next one. So like I said, you look at our position geographically speaking, and you will see that we are surrounded by many different realms. And that itself, says that we will be visited by elements from all these realms, and they will colonize India. So you have many different habitats in all these different areas that we all know of, whether it's northwest, east, south. And that's what gives rise to the kind of diversity we see overall, and especially in cats. Next one. So this is a map of India with biotic provinces that was made in the Wildlife Institute of India. And you will find many maps, depicting the biogeographic zones in India, many different maps with slight differences. But this is the one we follow, because the biotic provinces actually is a far more detailed, classification. And this is built from taking data, information from biophysical characters like soil, moisture, climate, and vegetation, the kind of forest. And based on that, they made this kind of, so you look at the number of different habitats in a way that we have for many different species, right? So we are really exceedingly rich. Next one. Now over that, if you superimpose the number of cats that are found in each of these biotic provinces or biogeographic, those are actually they're biotic provinces. Biogeographic provinces are larger. Okay, so this should read as various biotic provinces. You will see that the dark green ones are the ones where which have the maximum number of cats. And the Northeast is expected. You expect to find many cats there, but you'll be surprised that Gujarat and Rajasthan have almost the same number of species of cats as Northeast India. So these two areas stand out really, really strongly, as cat country or cat landscapes. Okay, next.
One second, sorry. Wow.
So let's just look at all the cats that are found in different landscapes. You see that there are some that will be found in other landscapes also, and some that are unique to the landscape. For instance, in Western India, the caracal is like absolutely unique. Okay. And of course, the lion is unique. And we had the cheetah, which we unfortunately and shamefully lost. We have the Asiatic wildcat, which is unique to this region. And then we have the fishing cat, rusty spotted cat, jungle cat, leopard, tiger, which are found in many other places as well. Okay, so these are the cats that you find in that really dark zone in Western India. Okay, now the next one. Okay, just go back once, please. I'll tell you what's unique about these cats that are very typically found in the dry open areas. And I'll talk about that a little later also. You look at the length of their tails. They're really short compared to the length of the tails of, say, we can't see them here because they're all in Western India, not the large cats. The large cats all have typically, medium-sized tails. But the smaller cats, you will see the ones that live in open country have really short tails. Okay, next. And then you will see these very long-tailed ones. And these are found in very deep, dense forests in Northeast India. And again, you will see that there are some that have come back again, like the jungle cat and the fishing cat. Okay, and you even have the leopard cat here. The leopard cat is not found in Western India, and maybe I'll talk about that a little later. But you'll see these very long-tailed cats that are very typical in this area, which is the clouded leopard and the marble cat. And then you have the medium-tailed cats like the golden Asiatic golden cat and the leopard cat. And then you also have the snow leopard in some parts of Northeast India, like Sikkim, and but they are in the higher reaches. And this actually it should be in the Trans-Himalayas, and I'll talk about that in the next slide. But here the unique ones are clouded leopard, marble cat, and golden cat, which are not found in other places, only in Northeast India. Next. And then you have the cats of the Trans-Himalayan landscape, which is the Palassus cat, which is found in the plateaus, Tibetan plateau, again in very open landscapes. And you have the lynx, which is the Eurasian lynx, and which is the largest of the lynxes. And then you have the snow leopard, which most of you are aware of. And now this completes, these form the 16 cats that are found, 16 cats, including the cheetah, that are found in India. Next. So now I'll just talk a bit about, how do you study cats? They are really, really very elusive. They are rare. They are nocturnal, most of them. Okay, and they have sensories or senses that are far, far superior to ours. Their eyesight, their hearing, their smell, and because they're elusive, the minute they sense somebody, they run off. So how the hell do you study them? So of course, one of the techniques is camera trapping, which we all know of because of all the tiger monitoring exercises that are on, and which is a fantastic way to study cats. And it also gives you images which are very, very interesting. And I'll show you some of them a little later. But there are other ways to study them, where you have to actually become a detective. So you have to look at tracks. You have to look down very carefully on the ground when you're walking, and you will find lots of tracks and signs. And you can then say, okay, this is a cat, but you may not know which cat. Of course, you can tell the difference between a tiger and a smaller cat, but within the group of small cats, you won't really be able to tell whether it's a jungle cat or a caracal or a leopard cat or a golden cat, or so that is difficult, but you can tell that it's a cat. So once you have seen tracks and maybe you really want to know what it is, you can probably place a camera trap and see what it is.
So I hope you are all enjoying and getting a great insight into the lives and the evolution, the origin of cats, the distribution. There are some questions which have come in here in the chat. I would encourage all of you all also to type in your questions. Let me give you a little bit of a background of Dr. Soumita Mukherjee, that before she started studying cats in the wild, she had a whole house full of cats in her own house. And she also is a very, very good artist. She sketches her cats, the way they sit, the way they pounce, or the way they observe, or the crouching position. So her skills of being able to render and sketch also has helped her in her research and her observation skills as a scientist. So I was just giving them a background as to how you started with a house full of cats and your sketching.
Oh, yeah.
Great, go ahead, please.
Just passionate about them. Okay, so okay, the next one.
Yeah. Yes, Rishan, the rusty spotted cat is found in India.
Yeah. India is actually a stronghold for rusty spotted cats. Probably the highest population of rusty spotted cats are found in India. And the only other two places they're found in are Sri Lanka and Nepal. So they're only found in India, Sri Lanka, and Nepal.
And in Bombay as well, right?
And in Mumbai, yeah, I'll talk about that.
Yeah, okay.
Towards the end.
Please go ahead, yeah.
Yeah. So there's yet another way to study cats, okay, which many initially used to say, oh, that's not very exciting, you have to come to the lab, but you also have a lot of field work. And so I think it gives you a bit of both field and lab, and that is what I really enjoy, because you collect poop of cats, okay, and you don't know which cat has pooped, okay, or for that matter, sometimes you don't even know which carnivore has pooped. Okay, so you pick it up in field, you take GPS locations, and then you come back to the lab and you identify them using DNA tools or genetic tools. Okay, so the outermost layer of any poop is covered with, the cells from the intestine. And those cells contain the DNA of the pooper. And then you can extract that DNA, and you can not only identify the species, okay, you can talk about which individual, if you have several, and if you have, it's a long process. It's not as easy as I'm saying it, but technically you can. Okay, and then you can talk about the sex of the individual who has pooped, and you can do studies related to status surveys. Phylogeography is comparing populations of the same species which are spread across space. Like you may have a jungle cat that lives in the desert and a jungle cat that lives in the eastern part at the foothills of the Himalayas, and they may be, they are the same species, but they may have a different pattern of genetic variation, and they may or may not be connected to each other, physically. So that's what phylogeography is about. And then you can identify unique populations based on phylogeographic studies, okay, which we have actually done with the leopard cat. And I am not sure whether it's included in this presentation, but I'll talk about it later. And then, of course, you can use it, you can use a lot of DNA material for determining illegal trade. Now, of course, not from scat. People don't trade in scats, but from molecular stuff like skins, if you find, or meat, if you find, you can actually talk about the kind of illegal trade that is happening. And then from scats, you can also look at what the species has, what the animal has eaten. And if you have information on the sex of the species and the species ID, the sex of the species, and the individual ID, then you can actually talk about what an individual diet is about as compared to, other individuals. So huge amount of information all packed into the poop. Okay. And it tells you a lot about evolutionary history as well. Yeah. So I'll talk about my journey into, this fascinating family of cats. So I began my journey with my master's dissertation while I was at the Wildlife Institute of India. So 6 months of our course we had to spend in field, and I chose to go to Bharatpur, that is Keoladev Ghana National Park, to study 2 species of wild cats, that is the jungle cat and the fishing cat, and also the golden jackal. And next. So I had to go there in summer, which was like, a jolt for me, because it is a very, very harsh place in summer, where temperatures go like touch 50 degrees at times. Yeah. And in this habitat, you find these 2 species of cat, the fishing cat, that is the spotted one to the left, and the jungle cat, okay, which is a very typical inhabitant of this kind of a habitat. And so I went to study these 2 species. And like I said, most of the time I could see their poop, which I collected, but I also had lots of observations of these cats. And one of the most beautiful images that I still have in my mind is of, which I can recall, is of a fishing cat sitting at a boating canal where there was water in the night and waiting to hunt fish. It was a full moon lit night. It was a moonlit night. And I was sitting on the other side of the bank and I was watching this cat. I do not know if the cat saw me. Very likely it saw me and didn't give a damn. Okay, and it went about hunting, and I watched it for around 5 to 6 hours because it just kept moving from one spot to the other. And finally it caught a huge fish. And then it jumped into the water, and there was a lot of activity, and then I couldn't see the cat anywhere. And then suddenly it came out on my side, and I could see this big fish in its mouth, and it went off. So all along, it just didn't give a damn, of my presence. I'm very sure it noticed me. Okay, and similarly, I've seen jungle cat. There was one episode where I saw this jungle cat sitting on a tree stump and just staring into the water like it was daydreaming, night dreaming maybe. It was very dark, but maybe that is daydreaming for them. So it was sitting on a stump and just looking out peacefully. And and I was staring, and then I stopped and I saw this 6-spot beetle that was found. There are these beetles that are found in Bharatpur. Very beautiful. They have 6 yellow spots on them. And so I was watching it and I was engrossed in that. And I kind of for a moment forgot about the cat. Okay, I had a torch in my hand and I was focusing on the beetle. The light was on the beetle, the spotlight. And suddenly this cat walked up and came right near my tire, the front tire of wheel of my cycle. And that also kept looking at the beetle. And then suddenly it saw my shoes and then it traced upward up to my face, and then it froze and then it ran behind a bush and it was watching me from there. So, and this was, I think, the closest I got to a wild jungle cat, and I could see faint spots on its body, which actually suggested that it was a young animal. And that's why very curious also. But those were, I didn't have a camera those days, but I didn't need one. I mean, I can still remember it very, very vividly. Okay, the next one. And in Sariska, I noticed something really, really interesting, that fishing cats used to poop in one place. Like, one individual will come several times and poop in the same place, usually very, very prominent places, like there are crossroads, open crossroads, which are also very visibly noticeable even to us. And there would be a huge pile of nilgai dung over there, because nilgais also use those very prominent places to poop. On top of that, the fishing cat would poop. Okay, so it was like a signpost. And so I kind of figured that when I found a lot of cats in one place, it would very likely be of the fishing cat. And then many years later, okay, in around 2010 or 11, I went on a fishing cat survey across India, wherever they are known to occur. And I found a very, very similar, what are known as latrines in Koringa, which is in Andhra Pradesh, and also in Sundarbans and in Dudhwa, okay, in Uttar Pradesh. So this is a habit of the fishing cat, where they have latrines, where they go and defecate repeatedly in the same place. Yeah, next. And then again, many years later, my colleague Aditi Mukherjee from SACOM, she's a faculty there now, she did her PhD on pythons in Bharatpur, and she had put up camera traps and she located the rusty spotted cat over there. I had not seen it, but she found it over there on one of her camera traps. And that's why it is like amazing that these little creatures can go completely unnoticed till suddenly by chance somebody catches them on a camera. So similarly in the image that I showed of the tiger and the rusty spotted cat, that rusty spotted cat I had seen in Sariska, and that was a first record for Rajasthan. And I just happened to come across it when I was going on a night drive, and this cat it crossed the road and it went and sat on a culvert. And we thought it was a kitten of a jungle cat, but it looked very different. And I had this little hotshot kind of camera with me. Those days we used to use film, if you remember, Anand. Yeah. And so I quickly took photographs, and it was so close to me. I could have stretched my hand out and touched it, and it was not bothered. It was just sitting there staring at me. Probably more, if it had a camera, it would have whipped out a camera and taken pictures of us also. But it didn't seem, it was unfazed. And I took pictures, and then I got really excited because I figured it was a rusty spotted cat and not known to occur in Rajasthan before. Earlier, it was believed to occur only along the Western Ghats for the longest time. And then now we have, with camera trapping in such a massive scale, we have many, many, many records of rusty spotted cats from across India. And then now in Nepal also. Yeah, next.
So incidentally, Shobhita, I had seen one at Fulwari Kinal and Sita Mata Sanctuary. when I was traveling between the two places in
Oh,
Rajasthan.
really?
Yeah.
Wow. Great, great. When was this?
This was about 2007.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
Nice, nice. You should put that location, just send a little note in
Okay.
GOTT or something, because these are very important when we are actually mapping them and for IUCN red listing and stuff like that.
Okay. Sure.
Yeah, because these are the locations we use to then provide like some models, niche
Plan
maps,
for.
stuff
Yeah.
like that. Yeah. So just write down a short note for in GOTT. So after my MSc, I was like kind of spellbound by Rajasthan and by the cats over there. And I decided I want to do my PhD there and of course on cats. And then, what other place but Sariska Tiger Reserve, which was absolutely beautiful. Okay, the kind of habitat I really love, open scrub, okay, with scattered woodlands and patches. And you have a very, very beautiful cat, the caracal that occurs there, which is very rare in India. And you have the jungle cat, which is very similar looking, and it's an amazing cat, the jungle cat. It is so successful. Okay, it is like, it's really, I don't know, like a superhero in a way, it occurs everywhere. And it is occurs in human habitation. And it's probably the cat that's doing the best in India. Yeah. So the next slide, please. And in Sariska, again, as I mentioned, we found this little fellow, the rusty spotted cat. So this is actually, this photograph is on a hill, a long hill range that runs across almost 12 kilometers and even longer perhaps, but there is a path that you can walk on top on the plateau. There's a plateau on top. And just below this hill is where I found this cat. And I believe they actually used to also live up on this hill, because often on my track plots that I had set, I used to find the little pug marks, and which were very likely to be of this little cat. This is incidentally the smallest cat in the world. It weighs only about a kilogram. Okay, and the largest cat, the tiger, weighs around 250 kilograms. So you can imagine the difference, and they both look like cats. Okay, they both look very, very similar. It's like, Wagachi Maushi, or the house cat is the aunt of the tiger, So the little cat as well as the largest cat, they look like cats, they look so similar. And that's another very unique feature of cats, in dogs and in canids and many other species, you will find quite a bit of variation, where they look different. And you may not know whether this is a dog or not a dog, but cats are cats, they look like cats. So, okay, the next slide. And this is my assistant, my field assistant, Omi. And his brother, Chotu, used to be my driver. And there was another boy called Sarvan, who used to also be my other field assistant. They were all from one village just touching Sariska called Karnakavas, which was actually, there was an area called Karnakavas in which the village was situated, and then they were shifted out. And we had a huge amount of fun while we were, working over there. I was there in Sariska for 3 years, and yeah, we had a great amount of fun. Next. We saw lots of tiger tracks, of course, because it was a tiger reserve. And this is a track of a leopard, which also, at that time, leopards, we used to find them only on the ridges, where perhaps the tigers were not there, or near Pandupol towards the end of Sariska. I don't know how many of you have been to Sariska, but, so they were found in just certain places, and all the plateaus were where, valleys were where the tigers were. Of course, they used to use the higher reaches also, but they were like, in a way, concentrated in the valleys. There was a lot of water that was provisioned for them in the valleys, and there were a lot of ungulates that came there because of water, especially in summer. Yeah, so there were lots of tigers there. And then suddenly in, I think, 2005 or so, the tigers went from Sariska. With everybody knows about that story. It was really, really, it was a personal tragedy for me, because I had seen so many over there, and it was quite horrible, because it's like as if your home has been ravaged in a way, and like your family members have been murdered. It really felt like that. It was really horrifying to know that all the tigers have gone, But when the tigers went, something very fascinating happened. Apparently, all the leopards came down into the valley. Okay. Now, because the leopards came down in the valley, we don't know what happened to the smaller cats, what happened to the caracal, okay, and what happened to the jungle cat. So you see, it has a domino-like effect. So when the tiger is around, the leopards will not venture so easily into that area, which probably allows the smaller cats to exploit those areas to a much larger extent than they would if, say, a slightly smaller predator who could predate on them also came along. Okay, next. And there was one beautiful image again that I have in my mind is of a tiger track. Inside that, there was a track of a jungle cat. Oh. And that's when it occurred to me that how absolutely identical the paws are and the paw prints are. And it was so beautiful, but I didn't have a good enough camera those days. And then it has this very beautiful fort over there, the Kankwari Fort, which was apparently built by the Rajputs, taken over by the Mughals, or built by the Mughals, taken over by the Rajputs, and again taken over by the Mughals or something. But basically, what the story goes that Aurangzeb had imprisoned his brother Dara Shikoh in this place. Okay, next. But it is, so fabulously rich that even till today you find all these paintings. I don't know about today, but back then you could still see these paintings and see the color, the red color. It's not retouched or anything. It's been there since then, so it's actually quite amazing. And these forts were actually almost lying there in ruins. And I think we have just so much of cultural history also entrapped in our forests, right? It's just beautiful. Yeah, next. And then I went from there after Sariska, I did a short stint in Ranthambore for a while, and where I had 2 little kittens to look after, Haldi and Mirchi, jungle cat kittens, which were released back in the wild. And then I moved on to the National Center for Biological Sciences, which is where I learned all the genetic, tools or the skills to do genetic work. And then I went on a survey across India to collect cat samples of jungle cat and leopard cat for a phylogeographic study. So I went back to Rajasthan, and this time I went to Western Rajasthan. All along Bharatpur and Sariska and Ranthambore were in Eastern Rajasthan, which is like really starkly different in a way from Western Rajasthan, because Western Rajasthan is just full of, it's like really, really open habitat. As you all know, it's a desert. And we went to the Desert National Park. And yeah, next. And we met all these colorful people who used to be very, very curious about us. We went along the Indira Gandhi Canal. Next. And the people told us there are 2 types of cats, the Minna and the Minni. Okay. The Minna is bigger and the Minni is smaller. That's all they told us. So we were left to wonder who's the Minna, who's the Minni. Okay, whether it's jungle cat and Asiatic wildcat, or Asiatic wildcat and house cat. Okay. And then, of course, we couldn't resist this. There's this place near Jaisalmer, near Longewal, actually. You must have all heard of Longewal, where that big battle was fought with Pakistan. And so that's a place where the army is present and not the BSF or a paramilitary. The actual army is placed there, and Longewal is like that place where the battle was fought is like just there, very close. And we went there, and of course they stopped us. It was Nima, Chandrima, Maya, and me. 4 of us went. Okay, and army guys stopped us and they said, what have you come here for? So we told them we've come to study cats. So they said, oh, we have a cat over here. So we said, no, these cats, we've come to study wild cats. And they said, no, there are no wild cats over here. We said, okay, no problem. They come out in the night and all that stuff. And they were very fascinated, but luckily we didn't tell them we came to collect poop, because they would have really wondered why the hell are these people coming from Bangalore to come and to collect poop of cat poop from, Jaisalmer. But anyway, we went to this one place which had absolutely no human being. Okay, because of course it's not allowed, right? It's a militarily sensitive area, and we had permits and stuff like that. But there was a big sand dune, and we couldn't resist doing this, jumping on the sand dune and sliding down. It was great fun. And yeah, next. So we did this for a long time, and then we went looking for poop, and we found quite a bit. Next. This is the kind of landscape that was there. Next. And we found a little den over there. Okay, and little cat tracks everywhere, and which is very likely to have been of the desert cat or the Asiatic wildcat, as it is actually known. Okay, this is a photograph from outside Ranthambore of the cat, which was by Dharmendra Khandal. But this is the habitat. We didn't see the cat; it was probably fast asleep in its den. But we could see all the signs of the cat all around, and we picked up scat also from there. And I was really excited because there is a cat called the sand cat, which is found up to Pakistan, and there are no records of that in India. But the kind of habitat it lives in is also found in India, especially in these areas. Okay, but the scats we collected turned out to be of the Asiatic wildcat or the desert cat. Yeah, next.
So Shomita, you should share this earlier landscape picture with this one Kishan, Pradeep Kishan, because he recently spoke about the desert, flora and other things.
Oh, is it? Okay, okay.
Yeah, so it just reminded me of that same kind of landscape that he's talking about.
It's so beautiful. It's just beautiful. Yeah, you'll see. I'll show you another photograph. Okay, next. Next. Okay, look at this. We talk about desert as something that's gloomy and devoid of life. Desert, that word is like, something dead. But look at the life over here. It's teeming with life. You can see those little tracks, gerbil tracks. Some insects have walked across. There are these cat tracks everywhere. You'll find desert foxes. And then if you look carefully, if you just keep peering at a distance, and you'll see these little heads popping up of these gerbils, and then you look up and it's full of raptors. It is just amazing. This is full of life. So that entire concept of desert is so false, Everything we see is only from our perspective. That's the problem. That humans are not found in the desert, so it must be a dead. In fact, it's far more alive because humans are not there. Yeah. So next. And then, of course, Jaisalmer has this amazing fortress called the Golden Fortress, which is located high up on a hill, and from any part of Jaisalmer, you can spot the fortress. It was, of course, strategically built like that. Yeah, next. And then you have these straight signs when you go to the market. It was hilarious. We had a great time. Yeah. Next. From Jaisalmer, we went to this place in Barmer called Kelor, which was actually right at the border. And there were these massive sand dunes. And then when we looked on top, we found these barracks, like kind of whatever. And we knew there were these soldiers there, army who was watching us. But basically, there was a settlement over there, right at the base, and people. But this is the landscape in Barmer, which is also extremely beautiful. Next. From there, my next, of course, I did other things. Like I went to other places. We went to Kanha, we went to Dudhwa, and we went to the southern places. And we collected a lot of scat, and we did our research. And then the next big project that I had on cats when I was at SACON Okay, this was around 2013 to 15 or 16. And that was in the other corner of India, which was a dark green patch, the northeastern in Arunachal Pradesh. Another absolutely mind-blowingly fascinating place called Eagle Nest Wildlife Sanctuary. And those of you who haven't been to Arunachal, please do so very fast. It's the most beautiful place on earth. Yeah. Okay. Next. So a huge chunk of Arunachal is still forests, and there's a huge chunk of still intact forest patch, okay, which is the Calming complex. And within that, you have the Eagle Nest Wildlife Sanctuary, you have the Sessa Orchid Sanctuary touching Eagle Nest, and then there is a river flowing, and on the other side, you have the Pake Tiger Reserve. Yeah, and Appu will have spoken about Pake.
Yes,
right?
yes. And
So,
a little bit about Eagle Nest also.
yeah. So this is one landscape, and this is like amazingly rich in cats.
If I can also add that on the other side is Bhutan. So you
Yeah,
have
on this
parts
side
of
will be Bhutan. Yeah. And on top will be Tibet. And the Dalai Lama came walking from Tibet from the top, and he took this route through
Bombilla.
Bombilla, and he came into Eagle Nest. It's just straight up. And he came into Eagle Nest, and there is a camp in Eagle Nest called the Lama Camp, where they claim that he had stayed there, for a couple of days before proceeding south. Yeah, next. And so in Eagle Nest, I tried to answer a question that are tail lengths of cats related to the kind of habitats that they live in. Okay, and like I mentioned earlier, that the jungle cat and the caracal and the fishing cat have really short tails and they live in open habitats. So, so you have, if you look at this graph, so this is the tail length. On the y-axis, you have the tail length and the head and body length, okay, as a proportion of the head and body length. And then on the x-axis, you have many different cats and their tail lengths as a proportion of their head and body length. And if you can see on the far left, you will have these very long-tailed cats. Often their tail lengths are even longer than their body. Okay, if you look at the range. So you have the marble cat and the clouded leopard with enormously long tails. Okay, and on the other end, you have the caracal, fishing cat, and jungle cat with really tiny tails. Okay, like 40% of the entire body length, head and body length. And then you have these ones in between, the golden cat, leopard cat, rusty spotted cat with medium-sized tails. So I wanted to know whether they are basically separated in space. How do they all coexist? It's possible that they all occur in different habitats. And does their morphology tell us a bit about the kind of habitat they would be living in? And that's what I went to study. So because there we would have marble cat, we would have clouded leopard, we would have golden cat, we would have leopard cat, and we would have, I expected the jungle cat to be there also. So we have 2 long-tailed cats, 2 medium-tailed cats, and possibly a short-tailed cat. Okay, and I would then be able to tell whether they actually separate out in space depending on their habitats.
Any chance of
aspects of their habitats.
Any chance of lynx in the upper areas over there, or Palace's cat?
Yeah, but not an Eagle Nest.
Okay, too low for it, too wet.
Yeah, perhaps they need like really open, like the Tibetan plateau kind of stuff. So they are there in the higher reaches probably. Yeah, next. So this was my question, are cattails tied to habitat structure? Okay, habitat structure, I mean, are they closed forests or open scrub, or are they medium, So what we hypothesize is that the long-tailed cats would occur in the closed forests. The short-tailed cat would occur in the open areas, okay? And these 2 cats, the golden cat and leopard cat, would occur in both the areas, is what we hypothesized. Okay, next. So Eagle Nest, like I said, is like a beautiful place to do work in the Northeast, because otherwise the Northeast is extremely difficult to work in. Just accessing places is so difficult. But here there's a road that runs through, and there are several camping places. So you can really go to all the elevations from 100 meters to 3,280 meters on the road itself, and you can access them through the road. And then there are many different types of habitats. There is an aspect also where this aspect from where the national park, wildlife sanctuary actually begins downwards is the rain-fed side, and the other part is the rain shadow side almost. So the kind of precipitation they receive is very different. So rainfall is almost 3,000 millimeters, more than 3,000 millimeters in the rain-fed, this side, the green part. And on the outside the park, it is half of that. Okay, next. And look at this, the forests. They look like, they should remind me of broccoli, dense broccoli, like massive, massive, giant broccoli. So it was just beautiful. I've never seen such enormous tracts of forests. Actually, they are not so enormous if you go to see, but when you go there, you're just surrounded by this. So it's like really absolutely awesome. Next. Wow. So you'll have a road like this going through. Next. And we used to, this was our camp. That was right on top in this place called Sundar View, which was named by the army because the view was very beautiful. So they called it Sundar View. And this is where my team lived. We used to cook down over here, below where the pillars are. We had put a whole lot of canvas around, and we had made a dining room over there. And we used to have a Serau who used to come and visit us. He used to just sit over there. He used to come and eat all our atta and all. And he would sit over there, sometimes even when we were there up. So this was really fascinating. Yeah, next. And there used to be a leopard cat who used to come and poop around. Oh, we have her on the camera also. Yeah, next. So we put a lot of camera traps. And I think all of you are aware of the camera traps, so I won't tell you, go into details of this. Okay, next. And these were the locations of our camera traps. Now, if you see, we couldn't go very far from the road because it was really not negotiable. Some of the places, they're like really, really steep terrain. And you would almost have to go into expedition mode if you want to go more than, 3-4 kilometers away from the road. So what we did is we placed, this was an area covering approximately around 100 square kilometers. And we had camera traps within that. Over a period of 3 years, these are the locations of our camera traps. Next. And we also picked up scats, which I'll be talking about later. And what we found is from the images that we obtained and from the scat data that we analyzed, that we thought that the leopard cat and golden cat would occur also in clouded leopard and marble cat habitat. But apparently they did not. They had their own little place too, They occurred in the medium canopy forests, and the marble cat and the clouded leopard occurred in really deep, high canopy forests, So this is a percentage of canopy cover that we measured using a mirror which was gridded. Yeah. So, so this is what we found. Next. And these are some images that we have. These are golden cats. The male is the dark one and the female is the light one. And there's a video where the male has gone up and the female is calling him down. So next. And you see the difference in color. And there were these were two marble cats. Okay. And so what was amazing was that both the pairs, golden cat and the pair of marble cat, indicated that this was a breeding season, because otherwise they do not occur like this in pairs. And we never photographed them in pairs before that. And this was in January. If you look at this, this is the first number is the month. So 01 is January, and both of them were captured in pairs in January. So winter is the breeding season. Next. Next. Yeah. And this is the amazingly brilliantly colored golden cat that we captured from one of the areas. And we noticed that there were just some amazing diversity in the coat pattern and color of golden cat. Okay, which Sahil Nijwan had studied in Dibang National Park, in Dibang Valley, not National Park, Dibang Valley in Arunachal. And he reported several morphs of jungle cat, of golden cat. It's a brilliant paper that he has published. And we found the same morphs even in Eagle Nest in a much smaller area. So next.
Hello.
So this is another golden cat in this forest that reminds me of Lord of the Rings. Okay, so no, go back.
Yeah, one second. Something. Just give me a second. Huh?
Yeah, yeah.
My system is frozen a little.
Because this is a video.
Video. Oh. So
Next, just go to the previous one if you can. Otherwise, it's okay.
No, I'm not being able to for some reason. Yeah. Right?
Yeah. Can you play video?
This of the golden cat,
okay,
or?
Fine. So if you see, this cat has markings on its body like a tiger. And this is also a golden cat. Okay, so we have, so you saw the first golden cat was, the two, they were just golden. One was darker than the other. Then the other one was red, almost red. And now this one has these tiger-like markings. Okay, and yeah, go to the next one. No, go forward.
Play?
Yeah, play this. So this is the same tiger whom if you look very closely, there are very tight rosettes on its body.
Yeah.
Which you can't see in this. But my driver used to call it Ma Durga for some reason. It looks like Ma Durga. With all the stripes on its face, it looked very fierce. Next. And then you have the marble cat with its enormously furry long tail. Okay, and look at the brilliant, the pattern on its body. It's so beautiful. It's like exactly like the clouded leopard, but I think even more brighter. Next. This Rohan took with his normal camera. He was walking and he saw it, and this is a marble cat who's marking its territory, the stone, with its glands on the cheek. They have glands on their cheek. And what is peculiar is the golden cat, okay, if you recall, always holds its tail curved like that. Okay, and the marble cat always holds its tail straight like that. Almost all the pictures of golden cats will be with the tail like this, and the marble cat will be the one. The marble cat, I think, doesn't know what to do with its long tail. It's almost like the tail is propelling the cat, Next. This one is also a video. This is a very nice. So this is a marble cat we got very close to. See, the tail is propelling the cat.
Yeah.
And there was one image we have where this cat, marble cat, comes. We can see it coming, and then it disappears, and then the camera is shaking very vigorously, and then we can see its big fat cheek and the whiskers, and it was rubbing itself on the camera.
Oh, okay.
So that camera was very special,
Is this the same one?
Yeah, this is the same one. And then we got this clouded leopard in the night. And if you notice, we have the golden cat and the marble cat during the day. Yeah, and then when we did an analysis, we found that they were very, very diurnal. Both the marble cat and the golden cat are diurnal cats. And then we have this clouded leopard. Next. We were very excited when he gave us this very beautiful pose. He's sitting very, nicely in front. So what are the conservation issues, concerning cats? So a lot of human dominated landscapes outside protected areas are where a large population of cats occur, right? And they have lots of different types of land use regimes, okay, mosaics. And what is very sad is a lot of this land, okay, which is probably not used by humans or is known as wasteland, okay, which is the most terrible categorization of land ever. So you have, I'll tell you how lopsided and how illogical it is. So when I spoke about the Desert National Park, which is actually a wildlife sanctuary, okay, that occurs in a landscape where if you go just outside the sanctuary, it is exactly the same landscape, but that is wasteland. That is categorized as wasteland, and this is categorized as a sanctuary or a national park, which is of the highest order and the lowest, So it is at the same time, you're giving the same type of land, okay, the highest value and the lowest value. So it's really terrible. And if you look at Rajasthan, and 23% of Rajasthan, okay, of which I think around 60 or 70% of Jaisalmer is considered wasteland. So it's really, really, it's an ecologically blind categorization, which I think is destroying a lot of our natural habitats, only because we don't see value in it as humans, for humans. So next. And that's where a lot of conflict issues come up. So for instance, just outside Ranthambore, there are these ravines, in which there were, jungle cat, rusty spotted cat, caracal, Asiatic wildcat, tiger, leopard, okay, and I think even fishing cat have been recorded in those ravines. And those ravines are now wasteland, and they are very rapidly being converted into agriculture. They're actually flattening the ravines over there. They're flattening the ravines for agriculture. So if you look at this map, this depicts the wasteland, the categorization of land under wasteland in this area, which we, if you recall, was among the richest for the cats. Okay, the richest, in fact, apart from the Northeast. And if you look at it, the lighter areas are the ones which have minimum land categorized as wasteland, which falls in Punjab and Haryana. Now there is, you don't have to think too much to say why. It's because almost all of it is agricultural land. Okay, and where we don't consider those as wasteland. Whereas all these natural habitats, okay, like Jaisalmer, 64% of the scrub and sandy areas are considered wasteland in Jaisalmer, which is a huge amount. And it's not just these species that occur there. There are so many other species, so many very important endangered birds that are found there, reptiles, insects we don't even know of, and carnivores, other mammals. It's just shocking that we haven't really given this a thought. And look at this, an area of 2,146 square kilometers has been converted into cropland. And this is very proudly stated in the Wasteland Atlas of India. Okay, that 2,146 square kilometers, we probably don't even, most of our national parks don't even come near to this figure.
Thanks.
And this has been converted into cropland. Okay, so cropland is still not as bad as when it goes even further into industry and urbanization. But it is bad for many species.
Palm oil plantations and things like that.
Not in this area,
yeah.
Not probably in Rajasthan, but definitely this will, when you convert to cropland, you have other things like pesticides and other things that come in, monocultures.
We just came back from Kutch, and there are so many areas where there is so much of castor oil, castor plantation and palm oil plantation.
Palm oil also?
Yeah, palms for palm oil. Yeah,
really?
Extensive. Kutch, the run.
Oh God.
Yeah.
Palm. I thought they would do palm oil only in northeastern India.
Now there is canal water coming there, so that's what you're saying.
This is so shocking, man. Yeah. It is really, really very, very dismal. I mean, I don't know what we are doing. Anyway, next. And then you have a lot of cats who look at many of these agricultural fields as their habitat, because it's an extension of their habitat. Okay, and you have them littering over there. Okay, reproducing there, because of course that is like, for them it's a habitat. And so these were little jungle cat kittens that were found by forest officials, and they thought they were leopard cubs, but they were actually jungle cat kittens. And here, this is I think it's a rusty spotted cat that is found in a sugarcane crop field. And what happens is when they are harvesting the crop, usually it coincides with the reproduction time, and all the kittens are lost. So you can see how over years their populations can really be severely threatened with decline, because they are not able to recruit new individuals, because all the kittens are very likely lost. Okay, next. And then what you find is like, I'll come back to scats now. It's a jump. Okay, you collect scats and you find that they have eaten, you get these jaws very intact. And from the dentition, you can tell what it has eaten, what kind of, whether it's a rodent or an insectivore, or what species of rodent it has eaten. Now, the obvious thing is, in agricultural fields, when they're eating rodents, it means they are really, in a way, benefiting the farmer. So there is a very clear case of, whatever in favor of them, right? That they are actually, this is an ecosystem service that they are doing. So next, not only are they benefiting farmers by eating pests, but also controlling disease in many ways, right? And these are the different dentition that we found in the previous one was of rusty spotted cat from Mumbai. And this one is leopard cat in Eagle Nest. These are the many different kinds of species that they were eating. This is a vole. This is a rattus species. Sorry, this is a vole. This is a rattus species. This is some insectivore. And this is very likely a squirrel. Next. And this is from Sariska. So this is Tetera indica, which is a desert gerbil. This is Golunda elioti. And this is the mus or the mouse, Platithrix. Yeah. Next. And what we found is, from a study in Sariska, we found that each jungle cat, okay, per year, it eats around 1,000 to almost 2,000 rodents per year, one jungle cat. Okay. And one caracal eats more than up to 3,000 rodents per year. So together, a jungle cat and a caracal can eat up to 5,000 rodents per year. That is 183 kilograms of rodent. One jungle cat, one caracal. So you can imagine the benefit, to agriculture and even to disease control that these cats can have. Next. So we also studied, cats in the SGNP, that is Sanjay Gandhi National Park in Mumbai. And it was with a collaborator, Nayan Khanolkar. I guess most of you are familiar with him. He's a very well-known photographer and also extremely curious about wildlife and very, very fascinated by nature. So this was his photograph of this jungle cat who came to this artificial water hole, and with a backdrop of, the lights of Mumbai. Next. And this is this amazing photograph of his, where Mumbai, which is a city of dreams with more than 23 million humans. And how many of us really know that we live amongst the most fascinating creatures like the leopard, the jungle cat, the rusty spotted cat, and many, many more, And of course, Mumbai, I think, has realized the importance of Sanjay Gandhi National Park, largely due to, NGOs like Sprouts, like what Anand is doing, a whole lot of education and awareness, and also Bittu Sehgal with his Sanctuary magazine, as well as, So Mumbai is, I would say, a fairly aware city, mainly because of a lot of people like Anand and Bittu and a whole lot of other people. BNHS is there, so it has a history of basically valuing the green patch that is called its lungs, right? Next. So we thought that since people are curious, okay, but they may not know enough about, especially about small cats, we thought let's rope in volunteers from across Mumbai and train them in how cats are studied and ask them to collect, samples, cat samples for us, train them, some of them who are really interested in how to analyze those samples, how to study the cats, and what kind of information you can draw from there. Next. So we trained them. We trained a whole lot of volunteers in collecting cats and putting up cameras. And we also trained forest staff in monitoring water. And they were there in many of these other training sessions also. Next. And we trained them, so because there were volunteers who were collecting, and they will probably not be aware of the intricacies that are required in actually collecting the data very carefully. So we had a way to capture whatever they're collecting, so that there are so the error is minimized. So what we told them, we trained them on how to use the GPS and navigate with it. And then we also told them that once you see a scat, okay, you label the vial, okay, with all the latitude, longitude, coordinate data. You keep the GPS next to the scat and a scale to measure the size of the scat, and you take a photograph and upload it. There is there is a software called EpiCollect, okay, an app called EpiCollect, which you can download on, everything was done on the mobile phone, So you have a software called EpiCollect that you can download on your mobile phone, and then you can upload all this data on that. So the name of the person who collected it and everything can be uploaded. And then we could actually sit anywhere and download that data and check for errors. Next. And all these were entered in that EpiCollect, that software, that app. Next. And what we found is that a whole lot of scats that turned out to be of rusty spotted cat were found in areas like this, rocky patches within the park. Next. Here, one of the volunteers on the scat collecting, two of them collecting scat. Next. So these volunteers just basically divided themselves into the three ranges where they were living closest to. And they used to go over weekends and collect scat. And when we found the rusty scats, most of them were in the Thane area, if you can see. And there was one, I have flagged it over here. You can see this thing called Timber Green Park. That's where I live in Mumbai. And just behind there is Dahisar Quarry. I don't know how many of you are aware of that. That quarry is an abandoned quarry, okay, which is really very, very kind of open to humans coming in and out. And there is a whole basti that lives down, okay. And there you find rusty spotted cat. Okay, and then of course in this area also, I think this is close, this is inside, and there was one area very close to RA where we camera trapped rusty spotted cat. Okay, next. Okay, so this is what I had to tell you today, but I'll tell you in Sanjay Gandhi National Park, actually after that we did a kind of a questionnaire survey with the volunteers, asking them what it is that they liked about, doing a citizen science project, and it was very, very encouraging. They were all very interested in knowing more about the cats, and which apparently we fulfilled, okay, as well as they could participate in a program that generated information on something that's very little known. And so it was very encouraging for us also. So now citizen science is becoming a big thing, because I think it not only spreads awareness, it also gives you some, what would you say, a stake in that, in the entire process of generating data and in conservation. And I think that is really nice because, everybody can actually contribute towards conservation in that way.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shobita. I'll suggest you take a sip of water, and there are a whole bunch of questions. Yeah, you've gone straight 1.5 hours. You can see the passion. I think the responses and the messages, I'm getting a whole string of messages that, such a fantastic and energetic talk. So thanks for that. If you're ready, I'll shoot you with the questions. I'm going to merge some of the questions so that it's shorter.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Pranav, who's given a whole string of questions, he's a passionate cat person himself. So
Oh, wow. Good,
yeah,
good.
a former intern of Sprouts. So he's asked, how long can lions, leopards, feral cats, respectively, survive on ostrich eggs, insects and birds, and dairy products?
Okay, so lions will never, lions, leopards, and
So respectively, so lions on ostrich eggs, leopards on insects, birds, and cats on.
okay, that's a very difficult. How long can they survive is not something I can, it's
Or
not.
can they? Huh? Okay.
It's not really been researched, right? I really don't know. I can't answer that. On, on insects, I doubt if many cats can survive on insects as adults. As kittens, yes, they do hunt. Small cats do hunt insects, but I don't think that would be enough for them to survive.
So if I can modify the question a little and say that, do they take like a single kind of food, or do they have a wide range of, what is the generic thing about cats?
So they need meat of any sort, right?
Okay.
So it can be meat, like for instance, a jungle cat may eat different types of rodents, largely rodents. Small cats largely feed on rodents. Okay, from whatever we know, whether it's a rusty spotted cat, jungle cat, leopard cat, they all feed on rodents. And but they take many different kinds of rodents, whatever occurs mostly in their area.
Right.
Okay, and as you know, tigers would eat a whole lot of ungulates, and again, they would go for sambar because that has more meat in it and that is more readily available in their area. Leopards would go for cheetal, over the smaller, or wild pig, but if those are not available, they can also catch dogs and other smaller mammals. So yes, they can hunt. They are hunters. They would hunt what they get, but they would maximize their returns.
So I'll again modify the second question that Pranav has asked based on, you've studied animals in captivity also, like lions and leopards, and looked at their diet. So his question was that tigers have greater meat requirements. So, between the, let's say, leopards, lions, and tigers, based on their body size, which has the largest food requirement, or what is it, like a ratio?
So in absolute terms, obviously the tiger would have the largest. Lion and tiger would be very similar because, although the tiger may be a little larger than the lion, there would be a lot of overlap in the body size. So obviously in absolute requirements, they would require much more meat than the leopard. Okay, so, you just look at it this way. On average, per day, a cat would require about 7 to 10% of food in its body mass, like in proportion to its body mass. So if it's for instance, if it's 100 kilo cat, it would require 10%. That is 10 kilos of meat per day.
But not like in ungulates, where the smaller ungulates who have a higher BMR, their consumption is much more qualitative.
That is in relative terms, not in absolute terms.
Okay, right.
Yeah,
okay,
so
the next question is very interesting based on your the phylographic work. That why is jaguar found only in South and Central America, although it's from the Panthera lineage, whereas leopards appears in Africa and Asia much wider? Any idea?
Yeah, so there could be many reasons for this. One is that probably the leopard, was able to colonize many different types of habitats. Okay, whereas the jaguar wasn't. Okay, and the jaguar also is in a peculiar size, between the leopard and the tiger, or the leopard and the lion. So of course, competition also would not really allow it to persist in an area where there are so many large cats. If you look at the large cat, there's a big size difference between the tiger and the leopard and the lion and the leopard. You don't find tiger, lion, and leopard in one area, right? Nowhere. Okay, and similarly, if the jaguar came in, which is bigger than the leopard, there would be immense there would obviously be an outcome where one or the other. right? And the jaguar lives in much wetter areas. So it's different.
So he's continued asking, why does the jaguar have a greater bite force than the lion and tiger, in spite of being smaller in size?
Well, because of the kind of prey that's available for it, perhaps it's the largest cat in that area, and it can catch caiman as well as tapirs, and
Right.
so.
So Shomita, you've done I think along with Sejal had done the first rusty spotted cat survey. So can you just since Rishan has asked about rusty spotted cat in India, can you just I'll add a little more as to now what are your findings? Where all have you all found them?
Rusty spotted cat. So if you look at the red list of the IUCN, okay, you'll have all the information there. So it's spread out across India, mostly in these dry and moist deciduous patches of forest. Okay, so and along the Western Ghats, in the Deccan Plateau, also actually even in Kutch, and like you have seen one. Okay, so it's found in many different habitats, but not in the rainforests of Northeast India, not yet, and not in Sundarbans or the very wet areas. Okay, so mainly in the stronghold is like the Central Indian, Central Indian Deccan Plateau.
Yeah.
And Western Ghats.
Okay. DB Jain has asked a question as why cheetahs are now extinct from India.
Because they were hunted out. Very shamefully, they were hunted out.
Another question by Pranav is that while analyzing this cat, first big cat say panther or tiger, and second small cat says fishing cat. How long will the small traces of flesh remain in the digestive system?
Flesh?
So after they've hunted, how long later would you find the traces in their digestive system? Digestibility, basically, your digestibility studies.
I didn't do digestibility studies.
Okay.
Basically, what I did was I just looked at whether, when they eat, how much do they poop?
Okay, right. Quantity.
So, yeah. So they would, their stomach acids are very strong, and they can digest almost all the meat. So the digestibility is up to 90%. Okay, and when they poop out, it's mostly bones and hair. For the small cats, it's a lot of jaws and bones and fur. Large cats also have fur and bones. But large cats eat a lot of meat also, right? Because there's a lot of meat that
goes. Yeah.
So they don't eat the whole animal. Like in small cats, when they kill a rodent, they just eat the entire rodent.
So Amruta's question as to how short tails of jungle cats or caracal help them. Similarly, how do long tails of clouded leopard? And I think that's answered now.
That's a very nice question, because the long tails are used as rudders for balance. Okay, whether it's a snow leopard negotiating the high ridges, or the clouded leopard, climbing a tree like a marble cat. Okay, so that also indicates arboreality in a way. But the short tails, what is interesting is we really don't know how short tails are beneficial. Okay, in what way would they be benefited? But they seem to be selected for, because although they occur in many different parts of the cat tree, they are not very closely related. If you look at the lynx, if you look at the fishing cat, you look at the jungle cat, you look at the serval and the caracal, they all belong to different genera, but they all have short tails, and they all have one thing in common: open habitats.
So that's a PhD topic, right? To look up?
Well, not really, because it's very difficult to answer, right? You can't really answer the why always.
Right.
So, but there is definitely a selection pressure. I would think maybe that was the original state of whatever, and then I mean, it's also probably to, I don't know, maybe to save resources.
Yeah, would it be to look at fossil records or something? Because I think earlier also saber-toothed cats and all probably might have had shorter tails, and as forest.
We don't know.
Okay.
We don't know. Yeah.
Right. Speculative. Fine.
Yeah.
I'll go to the next question. Like there are crossbreeds of individual between jackals and feral dogs. How much of chances of crossbreeding between, let's say, jungle cat, caracal, domestic cats?
So jungle cat, domestic cat, yes, a lot. Asiatic wild cat and domestic cat, very possible that it's already happening. Okay, because they are the same. They're both Felis sylvestris. Yeah. And the house cat has come about from the wild cat.
Felis silvestris.
They basically, the Felis silvestris domesticated itself. And that's how we have the house cat. Okay. Jungle cat is also because it's Felis, there is a chance of hybridization. We don't know, nobody has really done these studies about, but in South America, they found a whole lot of hybrid zones between different species of cats. So it's possible, but we really don't know. Usually they would not hybridize if they have a mate from their own species, right? They wouldn't, because your fitness would be lowered.
Right.
But for young individuals, if they cannot find a mate, they may hybridize with the next closest relative, because that would increase their fitness from 0 to point something.
I'm not clear about what Pranav means by this. Is this a mutation similar found in king cheetahs?
Which one?
Yeah, I think the earlier one, hybrids.
Not hybrids. I think he's talking about golden cat.
Okay.
Put the question around that.
Yeah, he's talking about the golden cat. So we don't know. There are many different mutations that can lead to difference in coat color and coat pattern. Okay, so unless you really study it, you won't know what it is, which mutation is leading to that particular kind of coat pattern, and whether it is selected for a particular, we are actually trying to put these things together and study it. But we are not delving into the genetics of, how and why. Why we are, but not how.
How, yeah. So Pranav is asking also that how true is it that a considerable portion of the Thar Desert was previously a dense forest? I think.
I really don't know that.
Yeah, dense. I wouldn't say, it was probably scrub forest, but yeah. The next question is by Rishan. He said that the other day he saw a large animal in his neighborhood society. This is in Juhu, and he realized that it was a type of a cat. It reminded him of a leopard. So is it possible that a leopard is found in Juhu area? If not, what large animal could it be?
I don't know.
Yeah, that's difficult. Rishal, you can check your camera. If there are cameras in your society, they might be able to give you much more greater information about that.
Maybe a great thing for all you know.
Yeah, and if a leopard could reach a mall in Thane, so far away from, or
yeah, I doubt it. I think it may be a Great Dane or something.
Yeah.
Around.
So Amrita's question is there a way to differentiate between crossbred and wild cats?
Crossbred as in?
Hybrid between
wild and not for Asiatic wildcat.
Like in morphologically.
Sorry?
Morphologically.
I don't think so. I think it's very difficult. Morphologically, it's very difficult.
Okay. Right. So I have a question for you.
So what somebody has asked about Bengal cat.
Yeah. No, he's saying that it could be.
That is a 4th generation hybrid.
Yeah.
Okay, it's the 4th generation, meaning the first is the actual leopard cat and house cat.
Yeah.
Okay, that progeny is bred with a house cat. That progeny is bred with a house cat. That progeny is bred with a house cat. And then you have a Bengal cat, which is a very, very diluted version of a leopard cat.
So I have a very both philosophical and a long-term conservation question. That on islands and in many urban areas now, so many domesticated cats that are there. And we know domesticated cats go feral sometimes and they hunt birds and other things. Is it time to reverse the domestication, and is it possible to reverse the domestication process? Because they're really going, we've seen it in the Wildlife Institute of India where they've come back with, snake, like Odonchara.
What do you mean reverse the domestication process?
In the sense rewilding or, stopping the process of any more having, do we need to have domesticated dogs, cats? Do they perform the function that they
human beings?
Sorry?
Do we need to have human beings on this planet? I don't think.
Right.
So I think we should first address ourselves.
Okay.
Before we talk about cats and dogs. I know it's a problem. And I know that, and I also agree that it should be responsible ownership. And
no, I'm saying about the strays that are,
the strays, I think they should be neutered or spayed, okay, just so that they don't procreate to that extent, okay. But beyond that, I don't know. I don't advocate killing and stuff like that.
Okay.
Certainly not, because the minute you start doing that, I think in the eye of the public, you are reversing a very, very strong message that we've been saying all along is live and let live.
Right.
Yeah. So I think it has to be addressed in a very, very gentle manner.
Right. It's a sensitive and very
yeah, because I don't think we should erode those things about, you know, all along we say that we should preserve all species and every individual has a right to live. And then you suddenly say, no, this one doesn't have a right to live. That one doesn't have, but we all have.
Because we decided so. Yeah.
Millions.
Yeah.
We can destroy the earth as we feel like, but point fingers at every other species.
Omkar is a very interesting
Rats give us COVID and the rats give us plague, but we do nothing.
There's a very interesting question by Omkar Damle. He's asking any effect of feral animals like feral cats and feral dogs on the wild small cat populations?
Oh, definitely. Definitely. I'm pretty sure. I don't know about feral cats because a lot of the other cats are larger than the domestic cat.
Okay.
Okay. So I really don't know in what way a domestic cat would impact, say, a rusty spotted cat. You see, the rusty spotted cat lives around Thane, where there are a lot of people also around, and surely there are house cats also. So I don't know if anything terrible is happening to them.
How can a study like this be conducted?
Disease can spread, but disease can spread both ways. More likely that it will come from the wild because they're reservoirs. You know, dogs. Yes, I have seen dogs. Dogs chase and kill jackals and foxes, but I don't know otherwise. Yeah.
So do adult male wildcats kill kittens fathered by them like tigers, lions?
They don't kill kittens fathered by them. They kill only when they are not sure of their fatherhood. Okay. That's the reason why they kill them. That, you know, it is somebody else's kittens and I will kill and I will have my own. They don't, they're sure if they fathered it, they will not kill it.
So Rishan has a question that do wild hybrids of big cats exist or are they all man-made?
Yeah, they're all man-made. Because where will you find tiger and lion together where they would hybridize?
Shamita, since there are a lot of students in the audience, one question that I want to, that if they want to get into studying wildlife, specifically cats, what would be a good way you would suggest that what would be the stepping stones for them to get to a career like yours?
Oh, MSc, a PhD, and then look for a job.
No, I'm saying from school, from the school times, what are the things, observations and other things? How did you?
So see, my time, it was very different. There were not many people interested in wildlife. So it was fairly easy for me in that way that, you know, okay, I was a freak in those days. Okay, where I loved cats, I loved nature, I loved wild animals. I wanted a career in that. And my parents were horrified. I'm sure Anand's parents were also horrified. And
even today,
a lot of us used to exchange these messages then, you know, that our parents really didn't know what to do with us when we opted for a field like this. But then now the competition has increased tremendously. You know, you can just see how many of you are here. At that time, we wouldn't even find these many people who were interested in wildlife, you know, or to be able to talk about wildlife. Okay, leave alone only cats, focused on cats. So ideally, I think there's a whole lot of material available now online, and you guys are masters in looking at stuff, you know, online, but do it well. You know, don't look at spurious stuff. Don't look at irresponsible stuff. Okay, read, there are a whole lot of very nice online journals available. Read those papers, read those articles. Okay, JOTT is one of them. We come up with a special issue on cats. And any one of you can be, you know, can download it and read the kind of stuff that research is happening on cats, whether it's surveys, you know, simple one-time observations like Anand's, okay? Anand, you should give it to our JOTT small cat special issue.
Yeah, sure.
Your observation with, the kind of habitat it was in and stuff like that. And all of you also, if you now, I think you are far more mobile than we were at your age, perhaps, in terms of having resources to move around. Okay, not now particularly because of this COVID thing, but otherwise. Okay, so when you travel and if you find anything that interests you, maybe a cat, maybe something else, always take observations down, note down as much as you can about the area where you saw it. Okay, and then cultivate a habit of writing articles, whatever.
And do your lab have internships or research possibilities that they can write to you? If you can share your email address, that they can
Yeah,
write.
sure. You have my email address.
Yeah, I'll do that.
Share it with them.
Yeah.
I don't have any cat projects as of now where I need interns, but definitely, because the thing is, now I work in an institute that focuses on birds, and so I have to focus on that. So most of my large projects will be bird related.
So forest owlets and
Yeah, but in that process, we also collect, if there are
relevant data.
possibilities, we can tie it up.
But suppose somebody's, let's say, studying environmental, let's say, chemistry, and they're looking at pesticides and wildcats. You might find somebody be able to look at how that works in the agricultural sector.
Just, you don't even have to look at wildcats. You can just look at the kind of pesticide content in, say, crops or and in rodent tissue. Okay, and then relate it to what cats eat.
Because you've done something similar in your undergraduate study, right? So when you look at rats and
toxicity,
toxicity studies, etc.
But that was nothing to do with
cats. No, but I think it gives you Great. So thank you so much. It's been a fantastic, one of the most, engrossing, and in Amruta's word, I can say that not a single moment of low or, like a flat kind of curve. It was like all high, high and high. So, and I would totally agree that hundreds of mysteries. I've been in this field for a long time, and yet, Shamita, it was completely true to the title that so many mysteries of cats, have been demystified today for so many of us.
Oh, there's still a lot left.
Yeah.
Like, my mother's cat, she loves watching television. Okay, every day. Okay. She will come and sit in front of the TV and watch, no matter what it is, news, sports, whatever. I wonder what's going on in her head. Like, what is it that she is so curious about? And that's the most fundamental characteristic of a cat, is curiosity.
Yeah.
Whether it's a large cat or a small cat, even a wild cat, they will run away, but they will be watching you from behind.
From there, yeah, we saw that recently. So great. I would say that, the best way to thank Dr. Soumitra would be to send amazing pictures of your both domestic and any wildcat pictures that you find. Not only, but with that, you please sit with that your date, your location, the kind of landscape that you found them in. Then it becomes scientifically usable information. Just sending a picture does not necessarily help.
And then I will tell you, because we have this, like I was telling you, we have this, special issues on small cats. It would be very nice if you can put in your articles there. Anand can guide you.
Yeah, definitely.
So you can seriously just collate everything and put it.
Definitely.
And you start with your article.
I'll do that. all the stray cats that I've seen around the way, place maybe. Yeah. So I think one last question before we close, since it's already on the panel. Pranav has asked is that what is the evolutionary reason why tigers, jaguars, and fishy cats love swimming?
What is the evolutionary reason?
Is there a
Well, that was a niche that was open for them to exploit, which was not exploited by other cats. So it was like, and there is a whole lot of meat in there for fish, right? And for jaguars.
So you must have all realized that although Soumitra does a lot of high science, in terms of the laboratory and, genetic work that is there, she can be a great storyteller. A scientist can be a good storyteller also, and engage you. We've, of course, in our hostel days, in our Wildlife Institute days, and much later, we've had long story sessions of field work. And maybe, Soumitra, it's time for you to write out a great, popular coffee table or a popular novel.
I have to sit and write 2 reports before end of March. So I am struggling with time for that.
We'll send you resources for that. But you should write out this public, into a very interesting, readable book like that.
Maybe you can be my ghostwriter.
Look, done. That's done. Great. Thank you. On that happy note.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you once
everyone.
again. And we will be announcing our next month's session within a week's time or so. Thanks.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thanks.
Good evening, everyone, and see you soon.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks a lot, Anand. Thanks.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Thanks,
Bye.
Yogita.
Bye.